all of a sudden, you know,
I was tired of that one.
no, absolutely.
I think we'll pass the game. They start at the same time every day. Well, like today, we'll be
There was a few days repeating my thoughts. Thanks. I was like, how many treats did the dogs eat? They were like, I don't know. I was like, the dogs came at breakfast.
Yes. Oh, quando a gente consegue.
You can tell some next to there.
Sure.
Testing. Looks like it works. Yeah, good.
This week, that go ahead, Mike. Good morning. What else?
So if I'm standing, you get the turkey? Oh, the other way. So if I'm standing here, you can see the turkey because we'll have the two speakers here. Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be turkey, speaker, speaker, speaker.
And I got the goat and then the. I wasn't the wet rat. Randy, if you could be kind of, oh, get some, I think it's started, maybe governor, second, and see if you can try one. This is very emotional time for me. Not today, but just.
No, I know. This
I
is,
can think of everything. This is the last. Oh, there it is. That's the real. So you want me to use that one, right? This. And I love having the folder. Okay. Yeah.
All of a sudden. Yes, you go.
We have 2 minutes.
Yep. I used to use that all the time. And someone got on a case about being a gimmick or whatever, so I stopped using it. Ron Sachs gave it to me.
Oh, cards are doing something.
Kurt should be up here, and like Brandy and Bob, I'm going to introduce them. I won't have them speak, but I'd like to introduce them. It's a very, very old church. It was a lot like here. Like the new one you built in here. Yeah, the congregation started in 1822. And St. James, he lost them, but they came here in the 1850s and found this small little church here. And then they remodeled it and rebuilt it in 1899. Windows and everything, 1899. It's one of the longest standing black churches in the state of Florida. And it's sad. Up north, they kind of, you know,
On vacation.
south, we get ahead.
Still a
So
couple weeks.
I work with all these farms
I
and
didn't know
years.
this was funny.
Not this year, because we're at, John Ryan, shocking, as well as preach from time to time.
Something
Yeah.
last day. It was just,
Big issue.
couldn't do it.
We were here since 1997. Going on vacation. Well, thank goodness, looks like we're gonna avoid the rain.
Parts. George was, his changes everybody was giving on, and yeah, right up to 10 minutes ago.
We still have a little more post. On Zoom, so let's do 1 more minute.
Property that some I'm gonna actually speak to this.
I think we're good, Dominic, to get started.
Good morning, everybody. Wow, great mic, George, Samantha. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dominic Calabro, and I have the distinct honor of serving as president and CEO of Florida TaxWatch now, I think just this past week, 45 years. So I was very, very blessed and I have and have been blessed with an incredibly talented team of researchers, nonpartisan, very, very dedicated professionals that know the budget process like nobody else. It's gotten more and more complicated, as many of you have witnessed and tried to follow it yourselves. But I'm also pleased to be joined this morning by former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Kottkamp, who serves as our Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Florida TaxWatch, and is actually the President and CEO-elect of Florida TaxWatch. Will take over from me January 1 of 2026. I also have with me someone who served almost as long as me, Kurt Winter. Kurt is our Senior Vice President of Research and the lead researcher on the annual Budget Turkey Watch report. We also have a phalanx of research staff, but I want to particularly name two people, and if they just raise their hand. One is Bob Nave, Senior Vice President of Research. Bob, and I've got his wonderful tie, just in case you wonder where you get that spectacular tie. I got it from Bob Nave. And also a great addition, wonderful addition to our team, Vice President of Research is Brandy Gunder. Brandy has been the budget director for the state of Florida for about a year and a half or so. And before that, assistant or deputy budget director, and worked in OPB for a long time, as well as the House and Senate. Together, these folks have well over 100 years of experience monitoring and evaluating Florida's budget. Florida TaxWatch has been producing these reports since 1983. I think maybe longer than some of our people have been around. And over the past 45 years, this TaxWatch report strives to promote additional oversight and integrity into Florida's budgeting process. And it's based on the principle that because the money is appropriated by the legislature, it still clearly belongs to the sweat of the brow of the hardworking taxpayers of Florida. The budget process, accordingly, must be transparent, must be accountable, and that every project should receive a proper deliberation and proper vetting, if not some thoughtful public debate. It's not perfect, never can be, never will be. But the whole idea is to make it more perfectible, just like our nation. And in the process, we have TaxWatch through the years has helped prompt the legislature to develop processes to improve the transparency, to improve the prioritization of that budget process. So those projects that do not follow this process are called budget turkeys. And by the way, we did not create the term budget turkeys. I don't know if Alan Morris did, the long-standing clerk of the Florida House of Representatives, or not, but we just took that upon ourselves in, I guess, 1983 or 86 and thereafter. But let me be clear on something. If Florida TaxWatch is providing this report to assist the governor in his budget deliberations, we're recommending that he not only considers the value and the efficacy of these projects, but also if it meets this process criteria. I remember having a very intense conversation, if not a debate, with former member leader in the legislature, and he said, well, I really want to make sure you look at the performance, the impact of each project. And I said, well, first, I wish you would, but secondly, we do. The performance is the integrity of the process. The process at this point is really the outcome. And if it has a good process, it has a better chance of being a higher priority, more valuable, more impactful, and more accountable. If it doesn't, it obviously has less chance. Still can work, but it will have less of a chance. It also must address a core function of state government. And if it was selected through a fair process that promotes the best longer-term interests of the taxpayers of Florida. But before going to the actual Turkey Watch report, I'd like to say that this session has been reported numerous times, has been unlike many others. And I've had the chance to be about 46, almost 47 years when I had worked previously in the Florida Senate Ways and Means Committee. One of the most unique sessions. They're all unique in their own way. I've seen some that went right up to the clock at June 30th. Actually, they had to move the clock past because it was actually July 1st. But nonetheless, this has been a little unusual because it's leaders of the same party. But in the final analysis, a lot of very, very good, productive things were accomplished on behalf of the hardworking taxpayers of Florida. And I think at the start, President Ben Albritton and Speaker Danny Perez said that they really wanted to demonstrate a commitment, and they demonstrated it in different ways. But I think they did try in their own way to look out for the long-term interests of the taxpayers of Florida. First, a long-standing key priority of TaxWatch has been to phase out the commercial sales tax on rents, or known as the business rent tax. It's an issue that TaxWatch has been advocating for about a decade and a half. So we're glad to see it happen. Florida is the only state in the union that implemented this tax, and we're thrilled that it now will be off the books. So our state may continue to enjoy its reputation, and more important, not only enjoy a reputation as a competitive state, but this is now money that particularly small and mid-sized businesses can use to expand and hire more staff and pay their staff a little better rather than the tax man. In addition, Floridians will now enjoy a permanent back-to-school sales tax holiday for the month of August. A good time. Coincides with the starting of school. It's a good public policy thing. And yeah, I remember when it first came out some 25 years ago, they said it's a gimmick. I said, well, yeah, it is. At the time, I said, but it's a gimmick Americans love. And why not? It's taxpayers' money to start with. It's not fundamental tax reform at that time. It was a tax cut. It was a benefit. Let the middle class and average Floridians enjoy that. But now this is part of our system of taxation. We like that. So measures are now in place to permanently eliminate the sales tax on many disaster and hurricane preparedness supplies. And a lot of that happened as a result of hurricanes during Governor Jeb Bush's term of office. I remember transversing the state in 2004 and 2005. He did a marvelous job with hurricanes. Further, we really are going to have to look at the property tax and make it more affordable and sustainable. A big part of it is, I think the governor's right, is that local government spending has not been in check. And to some extent, even the state with required local effort. So for the average Florida homeowner, we look forward to working with our elected officials, and we'll be having a work group looking at different ways of offering structural changes for property tax reform that are fair, conform with our due process and equal protection under the law, and really are sustainable and something that we can afford over a long period of time and still respect the functions of supporting our local governments and the core functions of police, fire, healthcare, and other things like that. Now let me turn this over to Lieutenant Governor Jeff Kottkamp to explain further our TaxWatch's view of the Florida's $115.1 billion budget for fiscal year 2025, 2026. Governor? Oh, by the way, turkeys are coming.
Thank you, Dominic. Good morning. Thank you all for being here, both live and online. Again, my name is Jeff Kottkamp, and I have the privilege of being the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Florida TaxWatch. So we're excited with the release of the 2025 Budget Turkey Watch report. This is Florida TaxWatch's independent review of the state budget, as you know, we do every year. Now, these appropriations projects on this report, we believe, violate sound budgeting principles in at least one of the following ways. One, they circumvent established review and selection processes, or they passed through the established process but are funded ahead of a higher priority project. Think of the 5-year work plan for highway dollars and having a project jump ahead of something higher on the list. Or they are inserted into the budget during the conference committee meetings, meaning they did not appear in either the final House or Senate budget. Or they did not adhere to the rules adopted by the Senate and the House for appropriations or for member projects. Or they have been in the Senate or House budget but were removed during the conference committee, only to be added back at the last minute at what has now been called the sprinkle list. Or finally, they are funded through an inappropriate trust fund, a duplicative appropriation, or appropriated contingent on the passage of legislation that in fact didn't pass. As someone who is intimately familiar with the inner workings of the Florida legislature, I understand just how important the Florida TaxWatch annual budget turkey report is. And we again want to remind everyone, just to be clear, we are by no means passing judgment on a project's merits, value, or need. With this report, we are simply holding legislators in the process accountable for the hard-earned taxpayer dollars that they are spending each year. We're telling legislators very clearly, yes or no, whether they follow the long-standing legislatively established processes the taxpayers of Florida both demand and deserve. Yes, government investments should be meaningful, and spending should make a positive and lasting difference in our communities. But at the same time, there must be transparency and opportunities for public input before a project makes it into the budget. Now, this year, Florida TaxWatch has identified 242 appropriations worth $416.1 million that qualify as budget turkeys. Again, that's 242 appropriations projects worth $416.1 million. While we commend the legislature for constructing a smaller budget than last year's by about $3.5 billion, Florida TaxWatch encourages Governor DeSantis to provide especially close scrutiny to $799.5 million in specific line items identified in our report. Moreover, while a project may be worthwhile, items identified as budget turkeys tend to serve a limited, not a statewide area. They are often not core functions of state government or are more appropriately funded with local or private dollars and circumvent well-established budget procedures, competitive selections, and oversight and accountability. Florida TaxWatch will never stop advocating for the hardworking taxpayers of Florida, which is exactly what we're doing with today's report. While we commend Senate President Ben Albritton and Speaker Danny Perez and their respective chambers for their good stewardship of taxpayer dollars, we should note that both budget turkeys and member projects have proliferated at an accelerated rate over the last several years. This is a trend we believe is wholly unsustainable, and Kurt Winter will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Finally, as we strongly encourage Governor DeSantis to assess each project we have presented a concern with, turkey or otherwise, and determine, one, whether its funding is counter to sound budgeting practices, two, if it addresses a core state function, or if it was selected through a process that promotes the best interest of the taxpaying citizens of Florida. Now it's my privilege to turn this over to Kurt Winter. As Dominic said, he's been doing this for about 44 years, so he's one of the leading experts in the entire state of Florida on the budget process, and we feel very blessed and privileged to have him on our team. Kurt?
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming today. As you all know, this budget wasn't a typical one. For one thing, it took over 100 days to do. And another thing that was not typical about it is it actually cut spending, which doesn't happen unless there's a shortfall. So one thing that was typical about the budget is it contains a lot of member projects or appropriations projects, as the legislature calls them. So even in a session where the focus was on cutting spending, money was found to fund a significant number of member projects. There was a perception in the legislature that member projects aren't really part of the legislature's spending addiction, as the speaker called it, and are really irrelevant to the recurring shortfalls that are predicted for Florida. And we don't think that's really the best way to approach these. Some of you might remember, maybe not, back to 2017 when the legislature adopted rules for appropriations projects or member projects. Back then, the speaker said, we need to do this because there's an epidemic of member projects. At that time, that epidemic was 500 something member projects worth less than $400. The last three budgets have all funded at least $2.8 billion in member projects. So you can see they did little to stem that tide. This budget contains about approximately 1,600 local member projects, and it may approach that same dollar level. We haven't been able to add them all up yet. In this session, the House and Senate members requested 5,100 projects totaling $11.7 billion. That's an average of 32 projects per member and $73 million. Many member projects are certainly worthwhile. They're very much valued by legislators and their communities, but they raise important questions. Should the state fund projects that are not statewide in scope and are usually local government responsibilities? Should taxpayer dollars be used to fund projects that are more of a luxury than a necessity? It must be remembered that member projects aren't the only way that the state gets money down to local governments. We share billions of dollars, the state shares billions of dollars in revenue with local governments. And also they send billions more down in the budget that aren't in the form of member projects. So a lot of money from the state already goes to fund some of these things. Member projects are outside of that, because outside of member projects, the grants that are in the budget and funded are usually awarded based on some kind of established criteria, usually in statute. It's a fair and competitive process that considers statewide priorities and statewide coordination, which is important. Most of the turkeys in our report are member projects that were funded instead of similar projects that went through some of these processes. The grant programs and prioritized, they also avoided these grant programs and prioritized selection processes. These include college and university constructions projects, local parks, museum and cultural programs, historic preservation, and local transportation projects. In some instances, the legislature did not provide any money for those projects that went through the processes and instead funded only member projects. This lack of a systematic review and selection process in some areas of the budget has become a real problem. Member projects show up in all manner of line items, and they move around, kind of, I think, signifying that they don't really belong anywhere. Not long ago, funding of these kind of projects was fairly rare, and now they've become standard. Every year there's at least as many, maybe more, of these projects that are added to the budget. So in addition to what we've qualified as budget turkeys, this report highlights these other areas that contain numerous member projects but do not strictly meet our turkey criteria. But we are asking that the governor take a really close look at them, review them for their merit and if they fit the state priorities. These include, water projects, housing and community development projects, school and instructional enhancements, local law enforcement, emergency, and management and fire services. These additional projects total almost $800 million. Those are the ones that Jeff mentioned earlier. I wanted to talk a little bit about water projects, which is one of these type. The legislature has rightfully been putting a lot of focus on water in our state, which is very important. It's good. They created the Water Quality Improvement Trust Fund. They created this Resiliency Trust Fund for statewide flooding. A lot of good efforts that do what we talked about, having established statewide criteria that experts grade them, prioritize them, decide where the money should be spent. This year, they gave a lot of money to the Water Quality Improvement Trust Fund, the grant program. However, they used almost all of that money for member projects, none of it to go through the actual grant process. They even had to change the budget implementing bill to say they could do that, because the statutes are pretty specific on what you can do with those grants. I look forward to answering any questions you all might have, but first I'm going to turn it back to Jeff. I think he has some closing comments.
As always, thank you, Kurt. I mean, he spent many, many hours on this, as you can expect. We're really proud of him. So since the founding of Florida TaxWatch in 1979, we've proudly served as the state's trusted government watchdog, taxpayer research institute, providing Florida's legislators and policymakers with thoughtful recommendations to secure enduring fiscal accountability and strength for the Sunshine State. We anticipate working with Governor DeSantis and our state leaders to implement these measures, increase accountability for every taxpayer dollar spent, and ensure the greatest possible return on investment for Floridians. We again want to thank you for being here today. We're happy to answer any of your questions. And for those of you who are participating via Zoom, simply type your question into the chat section and we'll read them and answer them as well. Thank you so much. So fire away. Come on up.
Are there any proposals that you guys are liking more than others so far that could make it on the 2026 ballot?
Well, the big concern, it started out that we were going to get rid of property taxes, or some mentioned that property taxes bring $55.2 billion. And even if you would increase the sales tax to offset it, it just doesn't work. So I think there are number one. But I think what we're looking at, and we'll be offering some recommendations, is first to try to level the playing field. We have Save Our Homes, which is shifted $1 trillion of property value to non-homesteaded property owners. So that's where small businesses, folks with second homes, renters, they're getting the shift, and some would say the shaft. So one thing we're looking at is how can we encourage local government to spend the taxpayers' hard-earned money more prudently, more efficiently, and without increasing value. They're taking advantage of rising values, not lowering the millage rate to the rollback rate as required in the truth and millage. So one is to provide, up until 1995, Florida, the second most equalized property tax system in the country. One of the reasons that was a hallmark of it, and it was a key component of our nation's equal protection provision, is that all taxpayers suffered the same consequence. Small business owner, resident, homeowner, whatever. It was in the beginning when you say we're going to protect, save our home, or save our waterfront homes particularly, and everyone else is not going to be protected. They didn't have any limit for a long time until 2008, and then extended permanently in 2018 to 10%. It caused a great division. It created this bifurcation where the voters saw lots of benefits because other people were paying higher taxes. And that's still very much the problem we have today. It's probably the single biggest problem, and it's fundamentally a violation of conservative governance and the foundation's, nation's founders of the equal protection under the law, because it's not equally protected. So one is to look at maybe providing same kind of limitation, whether it's 3% or whatever, save our property taxpayers, a similar kind of component. That would be one. The other is circuit breakers. We do believe that the big problem with property tax is the value of property is going through the roof. It's partly a good problem to have. But because of so many converging elements, the pandemic and Florida remained open, a lot of great decisions that our state made that others did not make, were paying the benefits of that success. So values are rising through the roof. So the key is how to do it without inadvertently creating other problems. So we're looking at making sure we don't solve this problem, but create even whack-a-mole, even farther, much more serious problems over here by unintended consequences. So we'll be looking at them. But one thing I'm glad is rather than just have something done quickly, one and done, let's think it through. Let's make sure this is something that can last for at least 10 years. Because you don't amend the Constitution readily. The other one is a longstanding recommendation of TaxWatch is on tangible personal property. We're not saying get rid of it, like we did with the TaxWatch led with the repeal of the intangibles tax, stocks, bonds, and money, but tangible stuff like this. And residents don't pay it, but business owners do. And And we want to at least to put the provisions to lower the rate or the base in statute so that you can make thoughtful considerations from time to time without having to go to the voter and try to explain it, and very, very complicated, very costly, things like that. So we're looking to do a couple things. Fundamentally save ad valorem, that puts people on equal footing. So we get at the problem is spending. The fundamental tenet of any conservative tax policies, you control spending, you control taxation. So we've got to do a better job of helping local government control spending, especially since there's fewer of you in your local communities. We don't have the same kind of, journalism and reporting that we once had before. So there's that lack of a check and balance, and they're running sometimes without that necessary check. It's just human nature. So combine those two together would be a long thing. We're looking to see the proposals that come out of the House and, of course, the Senate, and the governor's going to weigh in as well. But ultimately, if it's a proposed constitutional amendment, it'll come to the voters of Florida. It'll have to get 60% approval on that issue, and TaxWatch will play a very important role because we've got considerable experience and success in this endeavor. Another question? Well, we're here if you have.
We have some on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is from Action News Jax. The question was, Duval has several cultural projects that made the list, including funding for the Overlap and our History Center and new museum. Why did these projects qualify as?
Kurt, please.
Because there are established grant processes in the Department of State to fund historic preservation. These did not go through that. I don't remember exactly if this was one of them, but a lot of the programs, they didn't get any money for the established grants, which they almost always fund. And this year they only did member projects. So those are projects that didn't go through the established grant process or funded above things that did.
Sorry, guys, take so long. Maybe it's a question you might have asked. So.
One more pass. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Anybody's had? I think we're good.
Well, thank you all very, very much. We appreciate you. And feel free to call any of us if you've got any questions. Go walk through Christine if you could. But thank you very much. Have a wonderful week. Sign it down.
Recording stopped.
Good job, Kurt.